Hi there. My name is Nate Kokernot, and welcome to my channel. Uh, I've been off for a couple of weeks, and I would just say to anybody who's been following me, I was taking a break basically because of the astrology. That I won't say too much about it, but Mercury was in retrograde, and it still is, but it's coming out of retrograde soon. And one of the things that happens in the world when Mercury is in retrograde is communication does not work very well. So I just thought I would take a break from flapping my lips and not getting through to people and come back when the stars were more aligned, so to speak. So it looks to me like the stars are more aligned, and I have a lot to share with you today. So let me just get right into it. Some of you who are watching might be watching the news. Some of you probably are doing everything you can to not watch the news and not see what's happening in the greater world. To that latter group, I can say I totally get it. During COVID, 5, 6 years ago, I completely dropped out of the news cycle. I did not have a single clue as to what was going on in the world, and I was very peaceful, like almost constantly at peace, not knowing what was happening in politics or other news. So I totally get it, and I'm not really going to talk about the news today, but I am going to talk to the people who are watching the news and perhaps starting to feel a little more anxiety because of the news. Um, on this channel, I have been wanting to share another way of looking at all of this. And by all of this, I'm really referring to reality in general, that there is another way to look at it in which you can maintain your own peace of mind. Um, but really, you have to come to terms with the idea that that peace of mind is actually what you want more than anything else. Um, I think one of the reasons why we lose our peace of mind is because we go seeking after things that we think we want more than peace of mind. And that works okay so long as we're comfortable, so long as things aren't too crazy seeming out there. But when things start to get really uncomfortable, uh, I would say most of our worldviews are not actually up to the task of kind of maintaining peace of mind. But the worldview that I'm presenting, I know it does give me peace of mind. I can watch the news. I can see what's going on in the Middle East right now and not feel afraid. So that's basically what I want to share with you with today's episode and in general. So I'm going to start with a quote, and this is a quote from A Course in Miracles from the workbook. Uh, Here it is. And the name of this workbook lesson, by the way, is called I Could See Peace Instead of This. The idea for today begins to describe the conditions which prevail in the other way of seeing. Peace of mind is clearly an internal matter. It must begin in your own thoughts and then extend outward. It is from your peace of mind that a peaceful perception of the world arises. And I've been studying A Course in Miracles for 6 years, like very devotedly. Before that, I was familiar with it for 6 years, and it was what motivated me to go back to school to study psychology for 4 years. And I wasn't that devoted to it for those 6 years. But I can say in the last 6 years, since I've become a devoted student of A Course in Miracles, I do know how to maintain my peace of mind bar anything that's happening in the external world. Um, One thing I already mentioned is that I think spiritual ideas don't seem that necessary when things are just all right in the world. Uh, I would say in this world, things have been increasingly not all right over the last several years, but just kind of like the frog in the boiling water, you kind of get adjusted to it and adjusted to it, and it's only when it really reaches like the oh God, I'm going to boil to death, that the frog starts to get panicked and say, shit, I need something else besides the worldview that I've been carrying around for all this time. Um, there's that. There's also the fact that the spiritual truths that I'm speaking of, they're not new radical ideas. These ideas have been taught for thousands and thousands of years. One way of looking at where we are in the world today is kind of what Nietzsche was saying, I don't know, 200 years ago, that essentially God is dead. What he meant by that is like God is dead to us as humans. We have walked so far away from God that we don't, and what God is, synonyms for God could be nature, could be the universe, could be everything, could be love. Those are all synonyms for the word God. Um, and it's like what we're experiencing here in this thing that we call reality is a dream of what it would be like to be separate from God. Uh, Freud said dreams are wish fulfillment, and this is a wish fulfilled. And it gets really crazy every 85, 90 years. And we start to think, well, maybe we've been going about this the wrong way, and maybe these spiritual ideas need to be looked at again. And A Course in Miracles is basically, while it is aligned with all of the spiritual teachings before they became organized religions, which I would say are basically under the control of the ego thought system. And just to be clear, the ego thought system is the thought system of separation. It's based on the body principally, which is kind of the principal symbol for separation, is the body itself. Um, and its thought system has a logic of its own that just grows and grows and grows. And guess what it grows towards? More and more complicated and more chaotic. And then every 85 or 90 years, as I've talked to you about in past episodes about history, the wave breaks. It has to break. There's just too much chaos, and everything just breaks down, and we're left with kind of rubble, but we're still here. And Yeah, any of you who have any sort of concerns about nuclear war, I'd like to lay your worries aside and tell you there's not going to be a nuclear war. There is probably going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of devastation in the coming couple of years. That is what basically all of the astrologists and all the historians are saying. Well, not all the historians, but the ones who understand the cyclical nature of history are saying, yes, this is a period of upheaval and destruction, but it's all for the point of something growing up out of that that is better. So, uh, one thing I want to point out about Jesus, who is purportedly the author of A Course in Miracles, is when he was walking on the earth and teaching what he was teaching, one of the quotes that was attributed to him was, repent and the kingdom of heaven will be available to you. I don't think I got the words exactly right, the second part, but I know that this Greek word, which was basically what was written down by whoever was listening to him teach that or say that, they wrote it down in Greek. Um, I can share the Greek word with you in the notes underneath this, but essentially what it's pronounced as is metanoia. Metanoia, which was translated into repent, as in see that you are a sinner and repent for all of your sins, and then you can go to heaven instead of hell after you die, was a complete mistranslation of what Jesus was actually saying. That the word metanoia actually means have a change of mind, have a change of heart, and then the kingdom of heaven is available to you. And it's not available to you after you die. That's another misconcoction of basically the Catholic Church, of what Jesus was teaching. It's available to you now. In other words, there's a lot of fundamentalist Christians, just as there are fundamentalist Islamic people, the Shiites in particular, who believe in like martyrdom and believe that our group, our particular group, are the chosen ones. Uh, and basically, Armageddon is going to come, and then Jesus will return, and we, the chosen ones, will be ushered into heaven. That is just a complete fabrication of actually what Jesus Christ was teaching. You could say Jesus Christ would not be a Christian, at least not in any sort of resonance with what is being sold as Christianity today in the modern world. But he was teaching us that the world that we are looking out upon is not the real world. He's basically teaching in A Course in Miracles that we are in heaven right now, and it's simply that we believe that we separated from everything, from nature, from love, from God, that we all became sort of independent agents with our own purposes and agendas. And the guilt that came up from that really bad decision, really, it was a big mistake, uh, is the world that we're looking out upon. And so I've been for the past few years collecting evidence outside of spiritual traditions, because I call myself a spiritual pragmatist. I'm like, no, I'm actually seeking for the truth, and this is a capital T truth of what is actually true in the bigger picture. And I've collected a lot of evidence, and I'm going to just touch on several points today. I'm really just going to scratch the surface of them. But I've got two columns here. I've got a column that I'm going to call evidence that what most of us consider to be reality is not real. And the other column is evidence that what most of us consider to be reality is real. And I'm going to start with the cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman, who wrote a book probably 8, 10 years ago called The Case Against Reality. He's been studying cognitive perception for 40 plus years. He is the most rigorous scientist that I've come across, and he really understands the scientific method. One of the things that he understands about science is that every scientific theory starts with assumptions, as in, if you grant me that this and this is so, I can show you how all this other stuff is so as well. And the idea of space and time being real. Now, space and time is another way of just saying reality is real, is an assumption that is not explained or proven in any of the scientific theories that are based on it. It's just asking you to grant them that space and time are fundamentally real. And they don't try to prove it. Uh, I will touch on consciousness studies a little bit later, because that's where people who are stepping out of space and time as a fundamental reality are saying, hey, guys, like we got to step out of space and time if we really want to seek the truth. But at least probably 80 to 90%, and that's probably a low number, of people who are involved in the scientific community just want to limit the scope of what could be true to space and time. They don't want to look outside of space and time. The whole idea that there is a world out there that is happening independently of my mind or of your mind, you, the viewer, that it's just happening as it's happening and you're just passively observing it. That's the scientific assumption. And the evidence that that is not the case is overwhelming at this point. And the evidence that that is the case is pretty scant. And that's what I'm going to try and help you understand today. So Donald Hoffman says essentially, and with his interface theory of consciousness, which he developed several years ago, that essentially we're all seeing the world in kind of like our own virtual reality headsets is a good analogy for it, which means we're not all seeing the same world. Uh, this could explain why, as a couples therapist over the past 6 years, I have considerable amount of evidence of both halves of a couple, of a romantic partnership, coming in and telling me two entirely different stories, both of them wanting me to agree with their version of the story, and me saying, yeah, can we like let go of the story altogether and agree that we have different perspectives about this? And that's just the way it works with perception. Essentially, we see the past. We see our own past kind of filter as a filter over the present moment, which is basically what you learn in psychology school about what trauma is, but it also happens to be what an apple is. In other words, the only reason you see an apple is because of your past experiences with an apple, confirming for you that that's an apple. Okay. A lot of this stuff that I'm sharing today is pretty abstract. What I can tell you is I'm only going to scratch the surface here. I have many playlists on this channel where I kind of dive in deeper to different subjects that I'm going to touch on today, and I can't compel you to go and look for yourself, to do the research yourself, but I can advise you if you want to maintain some semblance of peace of mind over the next couple of years, it might behoove you to actually start researching this stuff because it's out there. There's tons and tons of people who know it. I'm far from alone in knowing this stuff already. So Donald Hoffman says, without a doubt, like there's 0% chance that we're seeing reality for what it is, what's actually there. He says that basically natural selection would not favor any species who saw what's actually there. I'm not going to go any more deeply into that. But I will mention point two, which is that he often cites the high energy physicists as in total agreement with what he's saying. Nima Arkani Hamed is one he often cites, who is a brilliant man. He's got a lecture series on YouTube. Basically, his moniker is Space-Time is doomed. He already knows it. Reality as we think of it is not actually reality. And he's got like at least 50 lectures, I think, in this series that he gave at Harvard that is available to view. I'm just going to warn you that it'll go way over your head with the math, just like it went over my head. But there's at least 100 other high energy physicists, most of them in Europe, it sounds like, who already know this and are already trying to design some empirical experiments at CERN, where the Large Hadron Collider is, to prove it. And I will mention that Donald Hoffman himself has had an intuition, I think in the last year or so, with a theory that starts with a different assumption than space and time is real. His theory is based on the assumption that we have conscious experiences. That's it. That's the only assumption. Which I can say, yeah, that makes sense. Like I can definitely acknowledge that I'm having conscious experiences all the time. And that's the only thing he's really asking you to grant him. And then he's proposing this trace logic, which I won't try to describe, but he's going to publish a paper probably in the next 4 months, I hope, where one thing that's important to understand about science is if the math doesn't add up, it ain't a legitimate theory. Okay, and he's working with two mathematicians, and there's several things basically that do not add up between Einstein's theory of special relativity and quantum mechanics, or I think quantum physics. If I'm not, I'm a pretty much a layperson when it comes to the physics, but my understanding is things don't add up between special relativity and quantum physics, and that's why they made quantum mechanics. And then quantum mechanics doesn't square, or the numbers don't add up entirely with Einstein's theory of general relativity. So they just can't, like all the string theories out there, which are based on the idea of physicalism, um, they don't add up. And so far, all of his stuff is adding up, and he's giving a lot of interviews on YouTube. I share them in the notes in the more section of a lot of my videos. Again, you could look at my playlist on science and see all this stuff. It's up to you. You can go on thinking that this world that you see is real. It's just that this world that you see is real is going to get pretty crazy and chaotic in the coming months and years. And you might want to start considering, if you value peace of mind, again, you might want to consider that there's another way of seeing all this, and it's scientifically supported. One of the oldest things is, as for pieces of evidence that this reality is not real, is the Planck scale. Max Planck, I think, was working in the late 19th century, if I'm not mistaken, could be early 20th century. And he realized that there was a base size of space, basically, and time. So there's a Planck, what's it called? A Planck length, and there's a Planck second. And the Planck length is like 1.34 times 10 to the negative 34 centimeters, which is infinitesimally small. Like the head of a pin is far, far larger, probably exponentially larger than the Planck length. But if you think about the Planck length as an analogy, use the analogy of like a pixel on a computer screen, that's the smallest kind of measurement of space that can be measured. Below that, it has no functional meaning. He discovered that level at which there's no functional meaning below it. Uh, High energy physicists are called high energy physicists because they look through microscopes that need tremendous amounts of energy, or high energy, to look at, observe at, and measure points or things that are infinitesimally small. And if you try to look beyond, infinitesimally smaller than the Planck, what actually happens, according to Donald Hoffman, is you create a black hole. So they can't do it. There's no functional meaning below 1.34 times 10 to the negative 34 centimeters. Uh, so that's one piece of evidence. And then there's the double slit experiment, which has been performed for over 200 years now, with a lot of different subatomic particles. And what was introduced by the double slit experiment was the idea that the observer seems to have an effect on the outcome of the experiment. I'm not going to go into the double slit experiment here. I will just say, if you want to watch a video on it, go to my science playlist. I describe it there. I noticed when I was researching it that, again, a lot of the people who are really stuck on physical space and time being real, they talk about the double slit experiment, and leave out the most intriguing part of the double slit experiment, which is that the observer, like when the experiment is not being observed, the outcome is one thing. when the experiment is being observed, as in when they're spying on it with a little camera, the outcome is completely different. So really, that's the birth of the idea of the observer effect, and it's also essentially, well, we'll get to that in a second. Here's another one. In the 1960s or 70s, the CIA did extensive research on a phenomena called remote viewing, which is the idea that if you reach a certain meditative state, you can literally transport yourself to another place in space and time and view what's happening there. This is the CIA taking this pretty out of bounds idea as far as what science is concerned with. Like science says, don't go out of this idea that there's local cause and effect relationships with everything. Uh, don't go into the supernatural. Don't go into pseudoscience. But the CIA itself went into this pseudoscience called remote viewing and had some pretty striking results. And it's viewable on the internet if you, I think all you really need to do is Google CIA's research into remote viewing, and you can actually see what they wrote about it. I have looked at it myself and I found it pretty interesting. Back to the double slit experiment, the next thing I'm going to bring up is the placebo effect, as another piece of evidence that reality is not real. And I can tell you from my time at school in psychology that every single intervention research project to prove that it's a viable intervention, whether it be a new modality of therapy or a new drug, a new medicine that's supposed to help you with some mental disorder. They all include the placebo effect, which is essentially the idea that faith is very, very integral to healing. Okay. So even scientific research, although people would say anything in the psychological realm is probably pseudoscience, the hardcore scientists would probably say that. Nevertheless, people do want to understand psychology, so they research it. And the placebo effect is always, it has to be included in the statistical analysis of any research project on an intervention. Which brings up, again, the observer effect that was introduced by the double slit experiment. That there is something to just the observer, the conscious agent affecting the things that happen, which means reality, what we know as reality, is not happening independently of our minds. We're constructing it. The next piece of evidence that I will give you is A Course in Miracles. And I'm not going to say too much about it here, but I talk about it all the time. I could tell you, having read it 12 times, it is the most logical and reasonable argument for another way of looking at the world. Um, it was like the first thing that made sense to me when I read it 12, 13 years ago for the first time. And I did not get it at the time. But it was about a year later after that that I remember watching the Access Hollywood thing blow up on the during the 2015 election, and I had this like initial reaction because I'd been following politics my whole life. My initial reaction was, well, that guy's out of the race. And then he wasn't. He just got that guy, I won't name him. He got bigger and bigger and bigger after that. And I was starting to just think, wow, this world is pretty absurd. This world is pretty insane. And I know that all these spiritual things are looked at as very woo-woo and pretty kooky. What I'm telling you is, as a person who has read A Course in Miracles 12 times, I can tell you, one, it is a book that is primarily about psychology. It's about human psychology. And it is actually incredibly logical and reasonable in that it starts from a premise that is actually true rather than a lot of logic, which starts from a premise that isn't true. To go on with evidence that that most of us consider to be reality is not real, we could look at the quantum entanglement which won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2021. Uh, one of the implications of quantum entanglement is essentially when you and your buddy or your lover, your friend are looking at the moon, you're not looking at the same moon. Each one of you has their own construction of the moon in which that they are observing. Um, Quantum entanglement also kind of answers the question of if a tree falls in the forest and there is no conscious observer present to hear it, does the tree make a sound? The answer to that question is what tree? There is no tree without an observer present. Reality is a construction. Essentially, and this gets into Carl Jung a little bit, who developed an idea of the collective unconscious. There is a collective construction of reality, and we could say that's the stuff on the news. Uh, but again, without the observers there, it wouldn't be there. There is no reality independent of our minds. Uh, all of this stuff is pointing at that. And the Nobel Prize, of course, is it is a it is a way of giving merit to certain scientific research. It says, yes, this is scientifically legitimate. We're going to award you the Nobel Prize. And the 2021 Nobel Prize was given to three scientists who proved quantum entanglement is actually a real phenomena. It's something that Einstein poked around at, but he himself couldn't really believe it. He called it spooky action at a distance. I'm not going to get too into it here, but I think just like everything I'm bringing up here on this list, you can look it up yourself, you can research it yourself. If you want to start to imagine that there is another way of looking at things that will bring you peace of mind. That's what I keep coming back to, is peace of mind, because when we have peace of mind, we can project a peaceful world around us. So it's pretty worthwhile to think about this stuff. The next three pieces of evidence that I'm going to give you, I'm going to just brush through, partially because I haven't really researched them that intensively myself. But I know people who have, and I know people who follow these traditions, and they work. Anyways, there's Joe Dispenza's work. Joe Dispenza was featured many years ago in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, which was kind of a lot of talking heads in a documentary, talk scientists, quantum physicists, and other channelers and such that were discussing reality, just in kind of the way that I'm discussing it now. The movie has a plot as well that I think is pretty cheesy. You have to look past that. But the talking heads part of this documentary is actually really revealing about how, again, back to the same story, we construct reality. Dr. Joe Dispenza has gone on to create a lot of scientific data with the workshops that he does. They're healing workshops with thousands of people showing up. Uh, some of them show up because they've been diagnosed with cancer and they want to get over it from the perspective of you need to heal the mind, you need to heal the belief that you have cancer in the first place. Uh, this is a controversial statement that I'm going to make, but basically, the whole cancer industry, it's an industry that is probably trillions of dollars now. And the reason it continues to thrive is for one simple reason, that it has not found a ultimate cure for cancer. And this is a cynical view, perhaps, but greed is materialism. I've been mentioning the words physicalism a few times in terms of certain scientists want to limit the scope of science to the physicalist perspective. Well, physicalism is really just shorthand for materialism. And the idea that we can basically get salvation from getting things The salvation would be happiness, and getting things is consumerism. And what any neuroscientist could tell you is you get a shot of dopamine when you get something, but then you crash after that. And that's true with all addictions, be it heroin, be it shopping, be it gambling. You need to do more of it to get that lift again and again and again. It's not a sustainable happiness. And back to Joe Dispenza, um, many people have cured themselves of cancer. I know one personally who has used that method, and he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and he beat it. Just, well, he did also go down. He had a foot in both canoes, so he went down the medical model as well. But most cancer doctors will tell you once you got stage 4 cancer, you're done. That's a death sentence, and he's still around. So this is what Joe Dispenza does in all of his work, and he documents it with a team of researchers, scientific research, which scientists would call pseudoscientists. But nevertheless, there's a lot of evidence that they're looking at, and you can choose to believe it or not. The people who have experienced it firsthand, they already know it's true. I'll add every spiritual tradition known to mankind, at least before things got kind of out there. Every spiritual tradition, Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, um, all the different sects of those, they originate from the same ideas. And one of the ideas is that reality is an illusion. It's written into all of them. And yet, most of us, or it seems as though most of us, think that they're both true and untrue, like that they're nice ideas, pie in the sky ideas, but also reality is real. And my favorite Course in Miracles teacher, Nook Sanchez, always talks about how you really got to get your foot out of the reality canoe into the spiritual canoe if you want true peace of mind. So I could talk for hours and hours about the different spiritual traditions. You could mention quickly the principle of Maya from the Hindu tradition. Uh, that is basically that the reality is an illusion. Another topic that I haven't really researched myself significantly, but there's lots of others who have, is near-death experiences. There's so many testimonies out there about near-death experiences that basically confirm people go to another place where there's a great light hallway. This is talked about in Course in Miracles as well. Uh, as they're dying, and sometimes they decide, I want to go back and do some more work here on Earth before I pass on to that next realm. I'm saying that next realm isn't after death. And this is what A Course in Miracles is trying to convince us of, is that we could be there now if we really believed it. If we changed our mind about reality, we could be in what we know of as heaven. That is actually where we are. The only problem is that we're not aware of it. Another piece of evidence that came up a couple of years ago was the telepathy tapes, which was a podcast series that, a lot of scientists would again say, well, it's total pseudoscience. It's supernatural stuff. It's woo-woo stuff. We shouldn't even consider it. And yet, what it was about was autistic people and some of the gifts that they have. And one of the things that they've discovered with the help of the telepathy tapes and the great work that that woman did is that autistic people, pretty much severely autistic people, have the ability to read people's minds. And they've done a lot of scientific research into that to prove it. And, I think about a lot of this stuff where there's the skeptics out there, and I'm pretty much speaking to the skeptics out there. That's my whole MO is to speak to the skeptics because I was a skeptic for the first 40 years of my life. That, yeah, you can say, oh, that's just woo-woo bullshit. It doesn't matter whether you believe it's true or not. In other words, the autistic person who knows that it's true is just going to sort of smile serenely when you tell them that that's bullshit because they already know it's not. They've already had firsthand experience, and their loved ones who've had their minds read, uh, they've already had the experience. They don't doubt it anymore. You can go on doubting it as long as you want to. That's fine. It's just that the world's getting a little crazy, and your worldview is probably not going to be able to contain your anxiety anymore. And so we're offering you another possibility of what's actually true and supplying a lot of evidence. Another thing that I point at is the cyclical nature of history. Now, this is first developed by William Strauss and Neil Howe in a book that they wrote over 20 years ago. I think it was in the late 80s or 90s, called Generations. And they gave a very rigorous and sort of detail-oriented argument that there's kind of a 85 to 90 year cycle of history that they divide into seasons: fall, winter, spring, summer. They also developed archetypes for the different generations themselves, and they kind of play around with how the different generations relate to each other and how that creates like trends that create a cyclical history. And the 85 to 90 year cycle probably is due to the fact that our lifespan, if we live a long, prosperous life, tends to be about 85 to 90 years max. And so one thing you could say logically is, and this is, do the math. Right now we're about 85, 90 years post World War II, the Second World War. And I'd say there's very, very few people who remember what it was like to be alive in that time. So there's very few people around here right now to say to us, hey, I remember another time just like this one. We're going down the wrong road, folks. Um, and if you count back 85, 90 years from that, you get the Civil War. If you count back 85, 90 years from that, you get, and it's all roughly, it's not exact. Then you get to the American Revolution, on and on and on. There's these undeniable patterns in history that there is indeed a cyclical nature to it, which tells you again, maybe the script is already written. Maybe we're just watching a rerun of the same thing with different technology and different fashion, different architecture. In each time the rerun gets rerun, but it's not fundamentally real. That's the larger implication of it. Another piece of evidence is the seven Hermetic principles. Now, Hermes Trismegistus, I don't know exactly when this guy was alive. Some say he was just a mythical figure, but others say he was actually a historical figure who probably predates Jesus by 1,000 years, somewhere in there. I mean, if you look it up, you get different answers from different websites, and I can't confirm or deny any of them. But the first of the seven Hermetic principles is mentalism. And mentalism is essentially stating that the world we see is just a projection of our minds, that it all starts with consciousness projected out. Um, and then the other six Hermetic principles are also very fascinating and telling. I would say they were the science for probably 2,500 years before Newton came along and created physics, and then kind of created this limited scope for science where it has to stay in bounds of space and time, which is just basically limiting our imaginations. And some people have imaginations that are much more expansive, and they refuse to stay within those limits. Those are people like Max Planck, like Einstein, uh, all these quantum physicists from the 30s and 40s, and Donald Hoffman and Nima Arkani Ahmed. These are all people whose imaginations are not going to be limited by this simple imposition of, for it to be scientific, it has to start with the assumption that space and time is real, because none of it's working for those folks who are trying to, well, and this gets to the next. I skipped one. And that was consciousness research. I'm sorry. So I'm going to back up. I realized that I missed that one on the list. Consciousness research is basically two camps. The physicalist camp, that's somehow consciousness gets sparked by organic matter somehow. We assume it's the neurons in our head or in our brain, and there's some magic process in which the awareness of being here gets sparked, and that includes our sensory perceptions, but there's other layers to consciousness besides that. And then this guy, David Chalmers, introduced, I think in the early 80s, the hard problem of consciousness. And this was basically his challenge to all the people who are working on physicalist explanations for consciousness. And he said, well, you got to be able to explain at least a single qualia, which would be a single conscious experience, be that the taste of garlic, the smell of lavender, um, the feeling of petting a cat. Those are all qualia, and there's trillions of qualia. And if you're going to just expect us to believe that it comes from some physical process involving organic matter, yeah, you're going to have to prove it. You're going to have to show us your work. And so they've been looking for a solution to the hard problem of consciousness for I don't know how long, at least 60 years now. Donald Hoffman talks about that all the time and says, yeah, if you can show it to me, I'll believe you, but you got to show me your work. And nobody in that physicalist paradigm has been able to actually prove that consciousness emerged from out of space and time. What Donald Hoffman is saying is space and time emerged from consciousness. And that's what spiritual truths are saying. That's what the rest of us are saying. It's pretty big implication as far as like everything that we experience in this world. It's not out there, it's in here, which goes back to that quote that I started this whole thing with. The idea for today begins to describe the conditions which prevail in the other way of seeing. Peace of mind is clearly an internal matter. It must begin in your own thoughts and then extend outward. It is from your peace of mind that a peaceful perception of the world arises. This is a time that we really might want to start considering that that's true, because then we have power. We are empowered to control it, but we have to believe it first, and we have to know about it before that. The accuracy of astrology, which is something I've only delved into in the last year. I suddenly got guidance one day to start looking into astrology and have discovered that it really does have a predictive aspect. And again, there's a lot of you out there I know who think that astrology is just woo-woo bullshit. And all I can tell you is any astrologer, any professional astrologer that you talk to and say that to, they're just going to have a serene smile on their face. They're not going to argue with you. They just already know that it is true, that it is actually a predictive thing. I'll give you just a couple of examples. And anybody who's trying to avoid the news, you might want to just turn the volume down for the next 30 seconds. But I think it was right around the 1st of March that Mars, this is in mundane astrology, Mars squared Uranus. Mars is known as the planet of action and war, aggressive behaviors, and Uranus is the planet of quick, sudden, shocking changes. It also is associated with things like revolution and, yeah, really electric kind of shocking shifts. And squaring is an aspect that is usually considered a negative. aspect. It's when they're 90 degrees apart in the zodiac. So Mars squared Saturn, and there also happened to be a asteroid that was right in the center of that called Algol, which has to do with like beheading. You could think about the head of a group or a nation literally being decapitated, or you could think of it just as like the leader gets killed. So around March 1st, two things happened, which was one in Mexico, the cartel leader was killed by apparently a Mexican operation. And the other thing that happened was the Ayatollah Khomeini was killed, and that was what began this Iran war. Both of those things happened right around that square of Mars and Uranus, and all of the astrologists were saying something's going to happen like that. They just don't know exactly what. They do their best to try to predict the weather, but usually what they're predicting is the climate. I could give you countless other examples of evidence that astrology works as a predictive tool. And it's also what I'm trying to say with it is another really good implication that there is something happening beyond this reality that is causing this reality. I'm not saying that the stars are actually, and they're going in and out of transits or into progressions or aspects with each other, are the cause of the things that are happening here on Earth. I'm saying there's probably a hidden variable beyond space and time that is causing both the stars to do their cosmic dance and the things happening here on the earth to happen. I'm not saying astrology is the cause. I'm just saying there's a hidden cause that causes both the stars and the things on earth to happen. So now back to the list, neuroscience. Okay, so there's one simple fact that I share all the time about neuroscience that is very, very pertinent to this argument and has to do with the nerves that go between the sensory organs and the brain, as well as the central nervous system, which is basically the seat of our emotions. And there are efferent nerves. Efferent starts with an E, and efferent nerves are sending information from the brain towards the sensory organs, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, as well as the skin, the tactile. So those are efferent nerves are sending information out to the sensory organs. Afferent nerves are sending information to the brain from the sensory organs. Okay. So now imagine if we were like built like cameras, where our eyes are just recording what's actually there. The safe assumption would be that somewhere in the range of 99% of the nerves, if reality is happening independently of our minds, then 99% of those would be afferent nerves, meaning that they're sending information from the sensory organs, the eyes, the ears, etc., to the brain, right? That makes sense logically. But the truth is, and you can look this up, it's proven neuroscience, 70% of the nerves going between the sensory organs and the brain are efferent, meaning that they're sending information to the sensory organs, meaning we are constructing the reality instead of the other way around. We're not observing reality passively, we are constructing reality. And that is significant to this whole argument. And before I move on, I want to back up to what I was saying about astrology and how the stars are not the cause of the things that are happening down here on Earth. There's a hidden variable that's causing them both. I want to make that same distinction about the neuroscience. In other words, we see these things about the afferent and the efferent nerves by looking at MRIs and all these other brain scan technologies that we have. Uh, but Donald Hoffman, the cognitive scientist, will actually tell you brains don't exist. We see brains when we open somebody's skull because we believe that brains exist. That doesn't mean that brains actually exist. So just like the neuroscience, or just like the astrology, the neuroscience is not, it's more symbolic. It's not actually the reality. In other words, consciousness does not emerge from brains. There are no brains. Consciousness emerges from the one mind that all the spiritual traditions have been talking about. And of course, in Miracles, the latest one that really explains it with reason and logic instead of parables and stories. It gets at all of this. And so, yes, the efferent and afferent nerves are just symbols. They're not actually anything to do with reality at all. Um, Here's another piece of evidence, and this is just something I witness every day as a therapist. I mentioned it before. There are probably at least several trillion and counting disagreements that have taken place about what happened. And that's just like between two friends or between two politicians or between two business people. We seem to disagree a lot about what happened. Trillions, I'm sure there's trillions of episodes by now of that very thing. Okay. We could cite the fact that there have been studies on witnesses to criminal acts like a robber running out of a convenience store, where the witnesses all basically see a different race of the perpetrator, right? One person probably because they have some past experience involving a black person will say that was a black guy that ran out of that convenience store. Other people who have their own past with, say, a Latin American person will say, no, it's a Latin American person running out of that convenience store. We all see things differently. Okay. This is like something that we all have everyday experiences of, right? But it's also ample evidence that perhaps we're not seeing a world that is happening independently of our minds. And that's really significant to know right now. The last piece of evidence that I will give you, although I've thought of several more overnight, I just don't want to go back to the animation and make the list longer. I think I've given you ample evidence, but Plato's cave allegory. If you don't know it, look it up. I think Plato was around, if I'm not mistaken, before Jesus, 500 years or so. I'm pretty sure. And his allegory of the cave is basically just another version of Donald Hoffman's headset analogy that each of us is kind of imprisoned in this false reality. We're chained to this idea of the limitations of physical space and time, even though spiritual truths have been saying for years and years that that limitation doesn't exist. All right, so that's the evidence that what most of us consider to be reality is not real. Now, here's the evidence that what most of us consider to be reality is real. What our eyes and ears, as well as our other sensory organs, are telling us. So that's the classic argument that I come across is, hey, I saw it with my own eyes, so I know it was real. And frankly, I don't believe in anything that I didn't see with my own eyes. That's the skeptical viewpoint on life. It's just completely torn to pieces by scientific evidence, and Donald Hoffman would be the person I would direct you towards, to who just says it as bluntly as anyone can say it. There's 0% chance that your eyes are telling you the truth about what's there. Sorry that that's the case. The truth is the truth, whether you believe it or not. It's pretty significant, though, to consider at this time when things in the world appear to be getting really, really chaotic. So, besides that, is this just deeply held assumption? And it really is. That's all it is a deeply held assumption that there is a world, an external world out there independent of our minds. It has not been proven, never has been proven, scientifically or otherwise. Um, it's just a deeply held assumption. And then the third thing I would add is there's this wildly and widely shared emotional attachment to this idea of attaining salvation. And salvation, by salvation, I mean happiness, as in like a sustainable happiness, by getting things from the world. So the whole physicalist paradigm, which again has been limiting science and its scope for probably 500 or 600 years now, for some of us, is based on the idea of materialism and the idea that we could be happy if we get enough of the right things. Okay, and so consumerism has obviously been sparked by this. Capitalism has been sparked by this, and frankly, like unmitigated greed has been motivated by this. And what I would say is the chaos that we can all see with our eyes if we turn on the news these days, it's all really just a direct effect of greed, of everybody wanting more of everything, and there being some limits to how much everything we can have. Uh, the idea that Jesus is presenting in A Course in Miracles is in heaven where you are now, but you're asleep having a dream. You already have everything because you are one with everything, everything in the entire universe. Every mind is integrally one, connected mind. But because of the ego thought system, which was this tiny mad idea of what would it be like to be separate from everything, that basically transpired into this dream or this wish fulfillment to show us what it would be like to be separate from everything. What that is essentially is suffering. All the suffering, everything we know of as suffering, is responsible of is comes down to that one wish or that one question that we ask: what would it be like to be separate from everything? So I'm going to leave it there for today, and I'm going to probably switch to a bit longer form, like today's episode from now on, which means there'll probably be 2 or 3 days at least between episodes. Uh, I hope that you were able to stay with me till the end. I hope that you would look through the playlists on this channel where I go a little bit underneath the surface on all of these different subjects that I talked about today. And you'll also see in all of those videos, I often share video links to other people talking, mathematicians, historians, Donald Hoffman. Yeah, I return to him all the time because he's come to the same conclusions that I have. It's just that I got them through my spiritual practice. He got to them through 40 plus years of rigorous scientific research. But we seem to agree on everything. And I have to say, I can't compel you to look at this stuff. You have free will to believe what you believe. But because I'm pretty certain this cyclical history thing is playing out just as I've been expecting it to for the last 3 years, that your worldview is probably not going to be giving you much peace of mind in the next 3 years if you're holding on to that idea that the world out there is happening independently of your mind. And I'm really saying, like, if you want peace of mind, you can have it despite the appearances of a crazy, chaotic world taking place out there. Have a wonderful day, full of blessings and miracles. And if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends. I really want to get this message out there. like I said, I'm not the only one saying it, but I am part of the chorus, and it's what we need to hear right now. All right, take care.